Legends of Runeterra grassroots tournament scene is taking a little bit longer than we all would have liked to get its feet off the ground coming into the new year, and while Duels of Runeterra is finally set to make a return this month after a couple of months of absence, it hasn't happened yet, and as far as I can find, there are no open tournaments happening this weekend. Instead, the two major events that I've got my eyes on are the RCO Invitational happening on Saturday, which I'll be casting the English broadcast of, alongside a Wandering Bard, and the top 32 of the Lorga tournament, which was an open from last weekend that is now playing out its top cut this weekend on Sunday. So not really a whole lot to cover in terms of, hey, this is what you should be bringing this weekend, and we should be getting our balance patch next week. So anything that I say this weekend wouldn't really carry over into next weekend. So instead, we're just going to go over the tier list. So this is essentially my first tier list of the new year. This is solely for 3-deck formats, be it Riot or Region Lock. I don't think a whole lot changes right now, though honestly, I actually can't remember the last time that there was a Region Lock tournament. I think for the most part, everybody is swapping over to Riot so that the testing you do in a grassroots scene tournament is better preparing you for a seasonal tournament, which I like. That said, up in tier 1, you should recognize all of these decks. I don't have sample lists just yet. I'm going to be filling those out myself from here on out, and then tweaking them as I see fit, because it's difficult to keep up consistently with finding tournament topping lists. Instead, I'm just going to make sort of staple lists and then go ahead and update them as time goes on, because they'll be on my Mobalytics profile. I can go ahead and just go in there and edit them, no problem. And that should be coming in the next couple of days, probably before the end of the weekend. If you are looking for sample lists because you haven't seen these decks before, I do apologize. But for anybody who's been following the scene, you know, TF Gohard, Zoe Lee Sin, Shen Fiora, Draven Ezreal, these are just pretty safe, very powerful decks. Draven Ezreal, I'm a little on the fence on, but honestly, it's really been proving itself more and more, and whether or not I think the deck is phenomenal or not, I do think, based on play rate and win percentage, it does belong in Tier 1. It's not really a boogeyman of the format, but it is just a solid deck, and that's what Tier 1 is really here in this meta, is just a bunch of solid decks. They don't have very bad matchups against a wide spread of decks, especially not things that you're going to be seeing. You could build something that probably beats Zoe Lee Sin, it's not going to beat a whole lot else, so unless you are anticipating a large presence of that deck, you can't bring something to counter it like that. And I had mentioned this on War Room, but I want to mention it again. Right now, we are in just a triple powerhouse meta, and what that means is, rather than thinking about what my opponent's going to be running and trying to counter meta that, which is what we've been in for the last couple of formats, now it just feels like you pick what you think are the 3 best decks in Legends of Runeterra, you slap those in a lineup, and for the most part, you're going to roll over everybody that you come across. Picking any 3 of TF Gohard, Zoe Lee Sin, Shen Fiora, Draven Ezreal, it works out phenomenally, because not only is, I believe, actually, yeah, all 8 regions are represented here. This is actually the first time I'm noticing that. I just want to make sure, yeah. No, Ionia is doubled up on, and we are missing Freljord? Yeah, we're missing Freljord. Okay, so there's a little bit of Ionia overlap, but because you're running in a Riot format, it's not a problem. You can go ahead and run Shen Fiora alongside Zoe Lee Sin, because you're not repeating the regional combination and the champions are different. So that's what I mean. Like, you can just pick any of those 3 decks and you have a very solid lineup. Then in Tier 2, we have Invoke, Feel the Rush, Grand Plaza Targon, Star Spring, Heimerdinger Zoe, Scouts, and Mist Wraiths. I've said this 100 times. I'll say it as many times as I need to. Tier 2 is still very good decks. You should run these in your lineup. These are very solid choices, especially if you're more comfortable on these. Now, Heimerdinger Zoe is probably the one that might look a little out of place to you there, and the reason it's in there is last format, we started to see a pretty big rise in Heimerdinger as we saw a rise in Invoke. It feels like as metas settle, while Invoke is very good, you know, sort of a Diana, Zoe, Shadow Isle deck. That's what I mean by Invoke right now. You could run a Leona variant as well if you choose, but a deck with Mountain Scryer in it. As Mountain Scryer decks become more popular in an open meta, once things start to get solved a little bit more, Heimerdinger generally replaces it as sort of the Invoke deck of the format. Now, that's more a European thing than a North American thing, but we are starting to see North America start to make similar considerations. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of data regarding this in Southeast Asia or the Asian server, so can't really speak for that, but in NA, in the West at least, that's how things start to pan out. We don't usually have the back half of the format go on long enough for Heimerdinger to really pick up in presence, but that's how it starts to trend itself towards the end of those metas. So I want to keep it on the tier list so that I can track the popularity of Invoke versus Heimerdinger decks. And then the other decks on here are just solid, but maybe they have bad matchups against the tier 1 decks, or, you know, they're a little bit too fringe playable. Things like Star Spring, Targon Grand Plaza, Field of Rush. Field of Rush had considerations to be put in tier 1 because it has a good go hard matchup. Previously, it had a good Lee Sin Zed matchup. I'm not super familiar with the Lee Sin Zoe matchup specifically, so maybe that's a little bit worse. I'm just kind of hedging my bets here. And Field of Rush is a little inherently inconsistent. It's a problem that the deck has had. It's one that's not going to get fixed, or it'd be broken again, so it just kind of is what it is. And then Mistwraith's still a very good... I mean, there's not a lot of aggro in the format, and Mistwraith's is still one of the better aggro decks. Obviously, still a terror for things like Go Hard. And then in Tier 3, we have Field of Mina, Deep, Frostbite Midrange, Lucian Plaza, and Discard Aggro. These are decks that you will still see in the format. There are a lot of things that I could have put in Tier 3 that I just left off the tier list, off the top of my head. Endure Spiders, Targon Overwhelm, or Freljord Allegiance Overwhelm, Teemo Sejuani, a lot of Hexcore Foundry decks. They're just not popular enough that I feel like they need to go on here. Deep, honestly, probably shouldn't even be on here, but I'm hoping and praying for it to make its return one day. And because Brazil loves Deep so much and the LBR is kicking off this week, maybe we'll start to see a little bit more Deep. I think that there are a lot of decks that have really fallen off recently that just don't fit well into the meta that we could see a comeback of a little bit later on. I'm thinking Deep. I'm thinking Twisted Fate Swain. I'm thinking, you know, TF Ezreal even. There's a couple of things that I'm curious about, so we'll kind of have to track that for now. Nab even. I know players have been experimenting with Nab a little bit more to counter Go Hard. I'm not sure how well it's going for them, but it is something that I've seen people doing. But those are decks that you are going to run into sparingly. You know, maybe you'll see one or two of these over the course of the day. You can still play them. You can very much still top a tournament with them, but they're not your best chance at doing it. But granted, like if Frostbite Midrange is the only deck you've ever played, yeah, it's absolutely fine to run in a tournament. You'll probably find a moderate amount of success. You will struggle to top 8, but it's not impossible. There's hope for you. There's hope for you. And meta depending, you could even bump yourself back up to tier 1 depending on how things shake out. And that's, just kind of is where it is. But yeah, that's the tier list for the opening weeks of 2021 of the last weekend of patch 1.16. And because it was going over a tier list and there aren't any events to prepare you for specifically, that is going to do it for me today. Now, I will be back tomorrow on the mic with a Wandering Bard at twitch.tv/Morbidorp at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the English version of the RCO. Believe we're doing that all in one day, and then I don't have anything going on Sunday. I think I have some stuff coming up next week that I'll talk more about on War Room. War Room should pop off a little bit more than Tournament Tactician this week. I feel like anytime that Tournament Tactician pops off, like War Room is going to be a little bit more of a recap, but for weekends like this where Tournament Tactician doesn't really have a lot of ground to stand on, then War Room is going to do some of the heavy lifting, and that's why I like having the pre-action versus the reaction kind of sequencing going on there, and then I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to fill the middle of the week with YouTube-wise. Might even be nothing. I might go back to streaming. I'm figuring it out, everybody. But in the meantime, I still have plenty to cast, and as always, my name is Boulevard. Good luck in your tournaments.